Hello, I'm going to talk about Nearing 40, the poem by Derek Walcott, and we'll start by taking a look at some of the context surrounding the poem. So, Derek Walcott is a St. Lucian poet who lived from 1930 and who recently died in 2017. He was the winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature. Now, the poem is about the process of reaching middle age and perhaps giving up on some of the youthful ambition that many of us have. And this quote is from Derek Walcott in an interview with Review magazine in 1985. And he said, quote, "You're aware of the fact that you have reached a certain stage in your life. You're also aware that you have failed your imagination to some degree, your ambitions. This is an amazingly difficult time for me. I'm absolutely terrified." Now, this is a long quote, but some of it, perhaps the second half, could be used in an essay to get you fantastic marks for historical context, okay? Now, the poem is dedicated to John Figueroa, a writer who mentored Walcott. And what I would say is that for really top marks, I recommend that you refer to the poem as an ars poetica. So, an ars poetica is a work of poetry that writes about poetry, okay? So, it's kind of there's a sort of level of meta fiction there going on, but refer to it as an ars poetica, and you'll be showing a good awareness of literary conventions. Okay, so let's go into the poem now. The poem begins with an epigraph by Samuel Johnson, famous figure in English literature and thought. For me, the epigraph is not that integral to our analysis of the poem and actually doesn't provide us with the opportunities to do language analysis, which is going to get us the highest marks. So I wouldn't focus too much on the epigraph myself. But in this quote from Samuel Johnson, we see the lines, "The pleasures of sudden wonder are soon exhausted, and the mind can only repose on the stability of truth." Now, I think this extract from this epigraph gives us a good thematic understanding of the poem. Those pleasures of sudden wonder that we have in our younger years, where we're full of wonder and amazement and awe at the world around us, become, quote, exhausted. And we begin to focus on things like truth, stability. And I think that is a great way into the poem, even if it might not be integral to our analysis of it. So I'd like to go into the main section of the poem. Now, I've split it into two parts on my screen. The thing I would say to you is that this poem has parts of it that seem to be very cryptic and difficult to understand, but you're not being assessed on your ability to go line by line and explain exactly what the poem means. You're being assessed on your ability to present an argument, present a thesis about the poem, and support it with some well-chosen quotes. So as usual, I've picked 5 quotes that I do think allow us to say some good things about the poem. So we start with this image of early rising rain, recounting as its coolness numbs the marrow that I am nearing 40. So it's the rain that he hears, presumably out the window, that reminds him that he's getting older, that he's approaching 40. Now, the image of rain creates pathetic fallacy. It's using the weather to create mood, and rain is typically something that we would associate with disappointment. And therefore, the pathetic fallacy is creating his own disappointment through the image of rain. The rain is described with the adjective early rising. Now, for me, early rising suggests achievement, but more than that, an obsession with achievement. I mean, nowadays there are lots of people boasting on social media about the fact they wake up really early and have a cold shower and do more before you've woken up than you could ever dream of doing in a whole day. But I think there's an idea of he resents the rain for rising early, perhaps because he really wishes that he could rise early and begin to create his great works of art and literature. He seems to be melancholic about the idea that he's getting older. I then talk about this quote, "the weak vision thickening to a frosted pane." So He clearly seems to have an awareness and perhaps a fear of the physical process of aging, his vision becoming weak, but also the frosted pane, the idea of a kind of only translucent or opaque window, makes me think of, yes, the loss of his eyesight, but perhaps a metaphor for the afterlife, some kind of afterlife state in which we are trapped in some kind of limbo or in heaven, whatever it is, but there seems to be some contemplation of the afterlife here, which shows that he has an awareness of his own mortality. I then look at this quote in blue: the bleak modesty of middle age as a false dawn, fireless and average. Now, that word average explicitly tells you what he thinks of middle age. Average. The sense of not being anything special, realizing that you're just one of many people. The adjective bleak tells us about the sense of disappointment he feels upon reaching middle age, though later on in the poem we see a kind of transformation to an acceptance of this fact. Similarly, the adjective fireless tells us that in middle age he lacks passion. Fire is used as an image or to connote passion regularly. Someone is described as fiery, it means that they're passionate. Someone having fire in their stomach suggests that they are passionate and erstwhile. So, lastly, I talk about the words false and fireless. Now, these adjectives are used to describe middle age using this fricative alliteration, this repetition of the F sound, okay? And that repetition of the F sound shows frustration to me at the process of reaching middle age. Looking at the second half of the poem, I think there's 3 lines here about which we could say so much. You could write a whole page about this, you could go into lots of detail. Now, the lines are as follows: ambition as a searing meteor will fumble a damp match and, smiling, settle for the dry wheezing of a dented kettle. So we begin with the simile of a searing meteor to describe ambition. Now that celestial image of a meteor, so it's celestial because it's up in the skies. Celestial bodies include stars, moons, meteors, anything in space. So it shows the burning ambition that he has as a young person, a searing meteor. And again, the idea of heat achieved through searing, it shows passion, determination. But see what happens to it. It fumbles a damp match. And there's that image of fumbling, clumsily dropping something. And that suggests to me the disappointment that middle age turns out to be. Now, there's a great technique that you can talk about here, which is bathos. Now, bathos is when a writer moves in a short space of time from something very dramatic to something much less dramatic, okay? And it creates a sense of anticlimax. So the movement of the simile, a searing meteor, to that very anticlimactic phrase, fumble a damp match, creates that bathos. The verb settle tells us that he is compromising or accepting that his middle age is somehow less or somehow less exciting. And lastly, we look at this image, the dry wheezing of a dented kettle. Well, the kettle, there's no image perhaps more ordinary and domestic than a kettle. This is the kind of image that's used to describe middle age, a dented kettle. And it's dented because it's no longer perfect. It has its imperfections, it has its flaws. And that domestic image shows just how perhaps disappointing his life might seem. But the last point I'd say is this: the ultimate conclusion is that old age isn't necessarily worse, might in some ways be better, and that's achieved through the use of oxymoron in 2 quotes. Sadder joy, the juxtaposition of those 2 opposite words, sadder, joy, and steadier elation. These two very contrasting terms create a sense that old age has bittersweet elements, some that might be worse, but some that might be better. So it shows a kind of nuanced approach to middle age. And the last thing I talk about is the use of free verse in the poem. Now, I think it creates a sense of freedom, and that might be the freedom from the pressure of youth to be successful. And I would say that's all you need to produce a really good analysis of this poem.